The biometric login on my corporate banking terminal cleared with a soft green chime, but the dashboard that loaded a fraction of a second later was completely unrecognizable. I did not see my standard operating capital. I did not see my meticulously managed domestic liquidity pools. I saw a stark, aggressive red banner dominating the top of the monitor, locking me out of every single financial node I possessed. Status: Asset freeze, Federal IRS levy, Form 668-AC, outstanding tax liability, $512,450. It was 8:15 on a Thursday morning. I am a 34-year-old senior forensic data architect. I spend my entire professional life analyzing the microscopic financial footprints of Fortune 500 companies. I do not have unpaid parking tickets, let alone a $500,000 federal tax evasion bounty on my head. I did not gasp. I did not frantically dial my bank's customer service hotline to scream at a minimum wage representative about a clerical error. Panic is the currency of the incompetent. I simply pulled up the secure messaging center attached to the federal hold and downloaded the PDF of the IRS Notice of Intent to Levy. The document was dense, bureaucratic, and devastating. According to the United States Department of the Treasury, I was the sole proprietor and primary guarantor of two high-volume e-commerce holding companies, Apex Trading, LLC, and Nova Global Logistics. The notice stated that over the past 36 months, these two entities had funneled nearly $3 million in unreported gross revenue through offshore merchant processors, completely bypassing domestic corporate tax obligations. I did not own Apex Trading. I did not own Nova Global Logistics, but I knew exactly who did. My younger brother, Trent, the golden child, the 29-year-old serial entrepreneur who drove a leased matte black G-Wagon, wore oversized designer watches, and constantly bragged at family dinners about his brilliant drop-shipping empires and tax-optimized corporate structures. He had not discovered a brilliant tax loophole. He had committed severe synthetic identity theft, utilizing my pristine Social Security number and my flawless credit profile to anchor his shady LLCs. He had harvested millions in untaxed revenue, funneled the cash to his personal lifestyle, and left the massive, ticking federal tax bomb sitting squarely on my lap. I did not spend the next hour crying. I spent the next hour inside my secure home office, rapidly accessing deep web registry telemetry, pulling the exact IP addresses, digital signatures, and encrypted routing metadata that Trent had used to forge my identity on his corporate applications. I compiled a microscopic, undeniable digital autopsy of his entire financial existence. Once the data was secured on a heavy encrypted titanium flash drive, I slipped it into the pocket of my tailored charcoal gray pinstripe blazer and drove directly to my parents' sprawling suburban estate. When I opened the heavy oak front door, the atmosphere inside the house was absurdly casual. My mother, Martha, was arranging imported flowers in the foyer. My father, Richard, was reading a golf magazine in the living room. And Trent was sitting at the kitchen island typing on his silver MacBook, wearing a designer cashmere sweater bought with laundered money. I walked into the kitchen and placed my smartphone completely flat on the marble island, directly over Trent's keyboard. The screen displayed the aggressive red IRS Seizure notice and the $500,000 federal liability attached to my identity. Trent looked at the screen. He didn't jump. He didn't even look guilty. He simply leaned back on his expensive bar stool and let out a long, theatrical sigh, as if I had just interrupted his workflow with a trivial administrative complaint. "Look, Victoria, calm down," Trent said, waving his hand dismissively. "My CPA was supposed to file an extension for the holding companies. The IRS algorithm just triggered an automatic compliance hold. It isn't a big deal." "An automatic compliance hold?" I repeated, my voice as flat and heavy as a steel vault door. You bypassed federal Know Your Customer protocols to attach my Social Security number to fraudulent Nevada shell corporations, and you evaded $500,000 in commercial taxes. The Internal Revenue Service just executed a total asset freeze on my entire life to recover your stolen liquidity. Richard and Martha walked into the kitchen, drawn by the cold, slicing volume of my voice. They did not look horrified at what their son had done. They looked annoyed at my tone. "Victoria, please drop the corporate interrogation voice," Martha scolded, crossing her arms tightly. "Trent told us about his little administrative oversight. His credit was ruined from his last startup, and he just needed a clean profile to secure the payment processing terminals for his new business. And he is family. He didn't steal from you. He just borrowed your financial infrastructure. And now I am facing an immediate federal indictment for severe tax evasion," I stated cleanly, looking directly at my father. Richard stepped forward, adopting his booming, patriarchal authority. "You are overreacting. You have an immaculate financial record and a highly successful consulting firm. If you just call the IRS, plead administrative ignorance, and set up a quiet payment plan, they will unfreeze your accounts by Monday. We will even help you make the monthly minimums. Trent cannot take a federal hit right now. He is just about to secure Series A funding. Take the fall on paper, Victoria. Protect your brother." They actually believed that sharing a bloodline granted them absolute immunity from federal law. They believed I would happily absorb a $500,000 felony, risk federal prison, and destroy my own life's work simply to ensure the golden child didn't have to face the consequences of his own arrogance. "I'm not going to set up a payment plan to finance Trent's federal crimes, Richard," I replied smoothly, checking my silver watch. "And I am certainly not going to plead ignorance to the Department of the Treasury." "Well, you don't have a choice, Victoria," Trent snapped, his dismissive arrogance suddenly shifting into cornered hostility. "The LLCs are registered under your Social Security number. The digital signatures are yours. The IP addresses trace back to your home state. If you try to point the finger at me, it will just look like you're a desperate tax cheat trying to frame her own brother. You have absolutely zero proof I touched those accounts." Right on cue, the heavy brass knocker on the front oak door echoed sharply through the foyer. 3 loud, perfectly spaced, authoritative strikes. Trent smirked. "That's probably your attorney. You better go figure out how you're going to pay my tax bill." I didn't blink. "I didn't call an attorney, Trent." I turned, walked to the foyer, and pulled the heavy oak door open. Standing on the front porch were 2 individuals wearing dark tailored suits and tactical ID lanyards, emblazoned with the gold seal of the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. "Victoria Ashford?" the lead agent asked, his voice a low, gravelly hum that demanded total compliance. "Yes, Agent Miller, right on time," I said smoothly, stepping aside and gesturing gracefully into the house. "Please, come inside. My brother and my parents are currently waiting in the kitchen, and I have a flash drive that is going to save your division about 6 months of forensic discovery." The arrival of the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division inside a sprawling, wealthy suburban home does not happen with cinematic sirens or drawn weapons. It happens with the quiet, devastating efficiency of professionals executing a coordinated federal mandate. Agent Miller and his plainclothes partner, Special Agent Davis, stepped over the threshold of the foyer, their dark suits and tactical gold-sealed lanyards aggressively clashing with the curated, affluent aesthetic of my parents' home. They did not remove their shoes. They did not offer a deferential, polite greeting. They carried heavy, rigid plastic evidentiary folders and the uncompromising gravity of federal jurisdiction. I led them directly into the open concept kitchen. The ambient, comfortable hum of the central air conditioning was instantly drowned out by the absolute suffocating silence that fell over the room. Martha's manicured hands froze completely over her imported floral arrangement. Richard abruptly dropped his golf magazine onto the sofa, the color rapidly draining from his authoritative face. But Trent's reaction was catastrophic. The 29-year-old golden child, the self-proclaimed visionary of e-commerce, instantly went rigid on his expensive bar stool. The arrogant smirk that had just demanded I pay his $500,000 tax bill shattered entirely. Richard's survival instinct kicked in immediately. He scrambled up from the sofa, his booming patriarchal voice desperate to manage a situation he had zero leverage over. "Agents, thank goodness you are here," Richard stammered, his hands raised in a gesture of practiced diplomacy, forcing a tight, anxious smile. "This is a terrible, escalating family misunderstanding. My daughter, Victoria, is dealing with a severe tax liability regarding her e-commerce ventures. She is under immense corporate stress and panicked when she saw the compliance hold. We are securing a private CPA to handle her outstanding liability and draft a repayment plan. There is absolutely no need for a federal intervention inside my home." Agent Miller did not shake Richard's extended hand. He did not look at him with the deferential respect of a suburban neighbor. He looked directly at me. "I am Special Agent Miller, IRS Criminal Investigation Division," he stated, his voice a low, gravelly hum that commanded absolute compliance. "And we do not dispatch criminal investigators to negotiate domestic payment plans for minor administrative errors, sir. We are responding to an active, Priority 1 escalation initiated by the primary taxpayer regarding massive synthetic identity theft, federal wire fraud, and the unauthorized offshore routing of $3 million in untaxed gross revenue." Martha let out a sharp, breathless gasp. She took a step toward the marble island, her hands trembling violently. "Synthetic identity theft? Victoria, stop this right now. You cannot accuse your own brother of a federal crime. He just borrowed your financial infrastructure to launch his business. He is family." "He didn't borrow my car, Martha," I replied, my voice as flat and heavy as a steel vault door. "He bypassed federal compliance protocols, utilized my Social Security number to harvest millions in untaxed revenue, and anchored a $500,000 federal tax evasion bounty directly to my life's work. I do not require family permission to clear my name from a felony." Trent finally found his voice, though it was thin, reedy, and vibrating with an unfiltered panic that completely destroyed his serial entrepreneur persona. He pointed a trembling finger at me across the marble island. "She is lying to you," Trent shouted, his chest heaving audibly, desperately trying to throw me under the bus. "Look at the Treasury file, Agent Miller. The LLCs are registered under her Social Security number. The digital DocuSign signatures match her verified employment records. With the IP addresses used to open the offshore merchant processors trace back to a VPN server in her home state. She's just trying to frame me because her business failed, and she doesn't want to go to federal prison." It was a brilliant, terrifying strategy of sheer manipulation. Trent was attempting to use the very identity theft he had committed as proof of my guilt. He assumed the federal agents would look at the surface-level registration data and simply arrest the name on the digital dotted line. He assumed wrong. "That is exactly what a functional federal audit is designed to uncover, Trent," I noted smoothly, unbuttoning the front of my tailored charcoal gray pinstripe blazer. I reached into my interior pocket and pulled out the heavy, encrypted titanium flash drive. Wait, I placed the metal drive precisely onto the center of the marble island, right next to Trent's silver MacBook. The soft metallic click echoed sharply in the tense room. Agent Miller looked at the drive, then looked at me with the intense, calculating focus of an investigator recognizing a flawless surgical strike. "What exactly am I looking at, Ms. Ashford?" Miller asked quietly. "You are looking at the foundational architecture of Trent's massive federal tax fraud," I explained cleanly, my enunciation flawless and unhurried. When Trent bragged about his brilliant tax-optimized corporate structures at family dinners, he failed to realize that I am a senior forensic data architect for Fortune 500 conglomerates. My entire professional life is dedicated to tracing obfuscated digital money. Trent's face went entirely pale. The arrogant tech bro was suddenly staring down the barrel of a loaded federal audit. Trent believed he was a digital ghost because he utilized a commercial virtual private network, VPN, to route his IP address through my home state while registering the fraudulent LLCs. I continued, listing the facts like I was reading a technical manual to a stranger. But he was so entirely insulated by his own arrogance, so utterly convinced that the systems of the world existed merely to facilitate his greed, that he made a catastrophic operational error. He paid for the encrypted VPN service using his own personal domestic credit card, I stated, tapping the titanium flash drive once with a perfectly manicured fingernail. Agent Miller's jaw tightened. He pulled a ruggedized federal tablet from his evidentiary folder. So you extracted the VPN billing telemetry? Yes, I confirmed cleanly. I pulled the deep web registry metadata cross-referencing the exact timestamp of the Nevada LLC formations. The IP address pinged my home, but the billing node for the obfuscation software traces directly to a Visa Black Card registered to Trent Ashford at this exact suburban address. That doesn't prove anything, Trent shrieked, his survival instinct completely overwhelmed by the crushing gravity of the digital trap. I let her borrow my credit card for a software subscription. That is circumstantial evidence. The merchant accounts processing the untaxed revenue are completely offshore. You can't touch them. We don't need to touch the offshore accounts, Trent, I corrected smoothly, adjusting the cuffs of my tailored blazer. It's because noise is what guilty people use to breathe life into their lies. I only make surgical strikes on domestic entry points. I looked directly at Agent Miller. Agent Miller, does the Internal Revenue Service require a verified secondary identity vector when establishing high-tier offshore merchant accounts linked to a United States citizen? Yes, Miller replied immediately, his eyes fixed on Trent. Under federal Know Your Customer, KYC compliance laws, the processor mandates a live biometric upload. A physical photograph holding a government-issued ID to prove the guarantor is actively authorizing the untaxed revenue stream. Trent stopped breathing entirely. The sheer devastating magnitude of the word biometric paralyzed his analytical pacing. I leaned slightly forward, or resting my hands perfectly flat on the cold marble island. Agent Miller, I instructed calmly, my voice carrying the chill of a winter morning. I want you to plug that flash drive into your secure terminal. I want you to open the folder labeled KYC Submissions. And I want you to look at the high-resolution time-stamped photograph Trent Ashford uploaded to the Cayman Islands merchant processor to secure the $3 million in untaxed revenue. Special Agent Miller did not hesitate. The veteran IRS criminal investigator picked up the heavy titanium flash drive from the marble island and inserted it smoothly into the encrypted port of his ruggedized federal tablet. The sprawling suburban kitchen fell completely silent. The ambient, yet polite hum of the central air conditioning was the only sound in the room as the tablet screen glowed with a harsh, uncompromising blue light. Miller tapped his screen twice with a stylus, navigating through the meticulously organized forensic directories I had compiled. He opened the folder labeled KYC_submissions. The high-resolution image loaded instantly. Miller's hardened, analytical face did not break its professional composure, but a sharp, undeniable flicker of lethal federal recognition crossed his eyes. He slowly turned the heavy tablet around and placed it flat onto the marble island, directly facing my parents and my younger brother. Displayed on the glowing screen was a razor-sharp, high-resolution digital photograph. And it was a mandatory compliance selfie required by offshore merchant banks to prevent international money laundering. In the center of the photo was Trent. He was sitting in this exact kitchen, wearing the exact same designer cashmere sweater he currently had on. His arrogant, entitled smirk was frozen in high definition, and clutched in his left hand, held prominently next to his face to satisfy the biometric verification protocols, was my physical United States passport, a document I had reported missing from my home safe a year prior. Martha let out a piercing, breathless gasp. The polished, condescending matriarch who had just scolded me for using my corporate interrogation voice completely shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The physical, undeniable proof of a massive federal felony was staring her directly in the face. And she stumbled forward, her manicured hands reaching desperately toward the edge of the marble island. "Trent, what is that?" Martha shrieked, her voice cracking into a high-pitched sob that echoed off the high ceilings. "Why are you holding Victoria's passport in a photograph for an offshore bank? You told us you just borrowed her credit profile. You told us it was a minor administrative oversight." Richard forcefully pulled his arm out of his frozen posture, his face flushing a violent dark red. He abandoned his desperate silence and rushed toward the marble island, instantly adopting the booming, authoritative tone of a patriarch attempting to forcefully manage a subordinate. "Agent Miller, wait!" Richard shouted, slamming his hand down next to the glowing tablet. "Do not formalize this investigation. We can structure a repayment plan. I will liquidate my domestic stock portfolio. I will cover the $500,000 tax liability right now. I will cut a certified cashier's check to the Department of the Treasury to clear the balance. This is a massive family misunderstanding. You cannot arrest my son for trying to build a business. You cannot buy your way out of synthetic identity theft and federal tax evasion with a personal check, Richard," I stated, my voice slicing through his rising panic with absolute authority. Richard stopped dead in his tracks, staring at me in paralyzed shock. "What are you talking about? It's just unpaid taxes. If the government gets their money, the problem goes away." I unbuttoned the cuffs of my tailored charcoal gray pinstripe blazer and rested my hands perfectly still on the polished marble. "Down, the Internal Revenue Service does not dispatch plainclothes special agents from the Criminal Investigation Division to collect a civil tax debt, Richard," I explained, listing the facts like I was reading a forensic audit. "They issue a standard bank levy and wait. Agent Miller is standing in your kitchen because Trent did not just evade a $500,000 in commercial taxes. He actively routed $3 million of unreported gross revenue through unregulated offshore holding accounts to bypass domestic banking compliance. He committed international money laundering." Trent finally pushed himself off his expensive bar stool. His designer sweater suddenly looked entirely absurd on his trembling frame. He stepped backward, his eyes darting wildly between the federal tablet and me. "That you cannot prove the money laundering," Trent stammered, his voice thin, reedy, and devoid of his usual golden child entitlement. "The offshore processors are encrypted. The IP addresses are scrambled. You have a picture of me holding a passport, but you cannot legally connect the $3 million in untaxed liquidity to my physical location. That money is sitting in a decentralized digital wallet. You have absolutely zero leverage." I turned my attention entirely to my younger brother. I did not raise my voice. I simply let the massive weight of the digital paper trail crush the oxygen out of his lungs. "I don't need to connect the liquidity to your physical location, Trent," I replied evenly, my piercing hazel eyes locking onto his panicked face. "I just need to connect the liquidity to the hardware you used to steal it." Trent froze entirely. "What do you mean?" "The secondary folder on that titanium flash drive contains a deep packet analysis of the encrypted routing metadata from the Cayman Islands merchant processor," I explained, my voice as flat and heavy as a steel vault door. Every single time you logged into that offshore portal to funnel untaxed revenue into your decentralized wallet, you utilized a secure web browser. And every single time that browser pinged the offshore server, it recorded the unique, unalterable Media Access Control (MAC) address of the physical network interface card requesting the transfer. The color drained entirely from Special Agent Miller's face. The veteran criminal investigator slowly looked up from the ruggedized tablet, the sheer, devastating magnitude of my forensic extraction crystallizing in real time. "You extracted the hardware MAC address from the offshore merchant portal?" Miller whispered, the silence in the room becoming suffocating. "Yes," I confirmed cleanly, and I cross-referenced that specific alphanumeric hardware identifier with the localized router logs I quietly pulled from my parents' home Wi-Fi network 10 minutes ago. I turned my attention entirely to Trent, raising one perfectly manicured finger and pointing it directly at the silver laptop resting on the marble island. "The MAC address anchoring $3 million in federally laundered untaxed revenue," I stated calmly, "is permanently hard-coded into the motherboard of the silver MacBook you are currently standing next to." A sharp, jagged gasp echoed across the kitchen. Trent realized instantly that he had not just stolen $3 million. He had permanently anchored his own digital empire to a massive, radioactive piece of physical federal evidence. Agent Miller did not ask Trent for permission to review his computer. He did not ask for a passcode. When a federal investigator is presented with a hard-coded MAC address anchoring $3 million of international money laundering directly to a physical device resting in plain sight, the Fourth Amendment exception for exigent circumstances triggers instantly. Miller gave a sharp, imperceptible nod to his partner. Special Agent Davis closed the distance in 3 massive strides. He reached across the marble island, snapped the silver MacBook shut, and slid it smoothly into a heavy, metallic-lined Faraday evidence bag, completely severing the device from any remote network access. Trent's survival instinct completely short-circuited. He lunged toward the laptop, his hands trembling violently. "You cannot take that!" Trent shrieked, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic croak. "That is my personal property. I need that for my startup. You do not have a warrant for my computer." Agent Davis effortlessly intercepted Trent's desperate lunge, grabbing him by the shoulder of his designer cashmere sweater and shoving him firmly back against the stainless steel refrigerator. "This hardware is no longer your personal property, Mr. Ashford," Agent Miller stated, his voice a flat, uncompromising line of federal authority. "It is currently classified as Exhibit A in an active federal money laundering investigation. Every encrypted keystroke stored on that solid-state drive is now the property of the United States Treasury." Martha let out a piercing, breathless scream. The polished, condescending matriarch who had just scolded me for not taking the fall for her son completely dissolved into sheer terror. Her perfect, arrogant mask was destroyed in front of the federal agents. "Stop it!" Martha wailed, tears completely ruining her expensive makeup as she stepped toward the agents. "He is 29 years old. He is just an ambitious boy. He didn't understand the tax structure. He didn't know he was laundering money. He just wanted to be successful. Victoria, call them off. You are destroying your own family over a paperwork error." "He is an adult who committed multiple Class B federal felonies, Martha," I replied, smoothing the lapels of my tailored charcoal gray pinstripe blazer. "The fact that you coddled him his entire life does not grant him legal immunity from the Department of Justice." Richard forcefully pulled his arm away from his paralyzed shock. He puffed out his chest, desperately trying to reclaim the booming patriarchal authority he had wielded over this family for 3 decades. He stepped directly in front of Agent Miller, pulling a heavy leather checkbook from his suit jacket. "Agent Miller, this has gone far enough," Richard demanded, his voice echoing loudly off the high kitchen ceilings. "I am a prominent commercial real estate investor in this county. I will not have my son treated like a street criminal in my own home. I am retaining elite federal defense counsel right now. And I am going to write a certified cashier's check to the Department of the Treasury to immediately satisfy the entire $500,000 liability. Agent Miller slowly stopped securing the evidence bag. He looked at Richard with unfiltered, lethal disgust. "You are not going to write a check to satisfy this liability, Richard," I stated, my piercing hazel eyes locking onto his panicked face. Richard whipped around to face me, his face flushing a violent dark red. "Excuse me, I have over $4 million in liquid capital. I will pay whatever it takes to fix this." "You had $4 million in liquid capital," I corrected cleanly, checking my silver watch. "Past tense." The ambient, polite hum of the central air conditioning was the only sound in the sprawling kitchen. Richard stopped breathing entirely, and the leather checkbook frozen in his hands. "What did you just say?" Richard whispered. "The Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division does not simply freeze the accounts of the primary target, Richard," I explained, listing the facts like I was reading a forensic audit. "They are required by federal law to follow the laundered money. And when I ran the deep packet analysis on Trent's offshore Cayman merchant processors, I did not just find the untaxed revenue he used to lease his matte black G-Wagon. I unbuttoned the cuffs of my blazer and rested my hands perfectly flat on the cold marble island. I found a highly specific consecutive series of digital wire transfers executed 6 months ago," I continued, my voice carrying the chill of a winter morning. Trent routed exactly $250,000 of federally laundered, untaxed money directly into your joint domestic checking account. He claimed it was a gift from his successful new startup to help you remodel the guest house. Martha's knees buckled slightly. She grabbed the edge of the marble island to keep from collapsing onto the hardwood floor. "You accepted $250,000 in federally laundered funds, Richard," I stated calmly, my eyes entirely devoid of sympathy, "which means you completely commingled your pristine commercial real estate fortune with a massive, radioactive tax evasion syndicate." I turned my attention entirely to Agent Miller. "Agent Miller, what is the standard federal protocol under Title 18 of the United States Code regarding the domestic recipients of international money laundering?" Agent Miller did not hesitate. The veteran investigator looked at my father with the uncompromising gravity of a closed federal system. "Under federal asset forfeiture laws," Miller stated, his voice a flat, mechanical line of authority, "any domestic financial accounts found to be holding commingled, untaxed, or laundered offshore capital are subject to immediate, indefinite federal seizure pending a full forensic audit." Richard's face instantly drained of all color. He looked like he had just been physically struck. He stumbled backward, dropping his leather checkbook onto the kitchen floor. "Seizure?" Richard whispered, his booming voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic croak. "Now you froze my accounts?" "The United States Treasury executed a secondary collateral freeze on your entire domestic portfolio at exactly 8:30 this morning, Richard," I noted smoothly, my enunciation flawless. "You cannot write a check to post Trent's bail. You cannot hire an elite federal defense attorney. You cannot even buy a cup of coffee. Your accounts are locked, your credit lines are frozen, and your entire commercial real estate empire is currently under federal lock and key." Agent Miller did not give Richard a single second to process the absolute destruction of his commercial real estate empire. He smoothly unholstered a pair of heavy, matte black steel handcuffs from his tactical belt and stepped directly toward the marble island. "Trent Ashford," Special Agent Miller stated, his voice a low, gravelly hum that commanded total compliance in the sprawling, affluent kitchen. "You are under immediate federal arrest for multiple counts of aggravated synthetic identity theft, massive commercial wire fraud, active tax evasion exceeding $500,000, and international money laundering. You have the right to remain silent." Trent took half a step backward against the stainless steel refrigerator, slick with a cold, pale sweat. The booming, arrogant serial entrepreneur who had casually told me to take the fall for his crimes simply buckled. He raised his trembling hands in a gesture of absolute, unfiltered panic. "No, wait," Trent stammered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched sob as Agent Davis forcefully grabbed his arm. "I am an early-stage founder. I am securing Series A funding this afternoon. I will give you the private keys to the offshore wallets. You can have the $3 million. Just let me call my investors." "You will have plenty of time to call your investors from the federal holding facility, Trent," Miller said, securing the heavy steel cuffs around Trent's shaking, manicured wrists. The mechanical ratcheting sound echoing off the high ceilings was the most definitive, uncompromising sound I had ever heard. Martha let out a piercing, breathless shriek as the second cuff clicked shut. She did not fight. Her knees simply gave out entirely, and she sank to the hardwood floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Her tailored suburban aesthetic, her perfect, arrogant mask of maternal enablement, was completely destroyed. Richard watched his golden child being physically restrained, his face slick with cold sweat, trembling violently near the dropped leather checkbook. The prominent commercial real estate investor was entirely broken by the sheer devastating reality that his $4 million fortune was currently locked inside a federal evidence vault. He had tried to buy his son out of a federal felony, and instead he had bought himself a massive, multi-year IRS forensic audit. I watched the federal agents actively escort my younger brother out the heavy oak front doors and toward the unmarked federal SUV parked in the driveway. I did not feel a sudden emotional rush of triumphant joy. I just felt the quiet, steady relief of a closed system functioning exactly as designed. Agent Miller paused in the foyer, turning his cold, analytical gaze back to my father. "Mr. Ashford," Miller stated, his voice devoid of any sympathy, "the Internal Revenue Service will be dispatching a forensic audit team to your commercial real estate offices by noon tomorrow. Do not attempt to move any physical assets or access any frozen credit lines. It will trigger an immediate secondary arrest for obstruction." Miller looked at me, tipping his head slightly in a rare gesture of professional respect. "Ms. Ashford, the Criminal Investigation Division is officially executing a full forensic extraction of your flash drive. Based on the preliminary biometric evidence and the hardware MAC verification, the federal levy against your Social Security number and personal accounts will be temporarily suspended by the end of the business day. You are cleared." "Understood, Agent Miller," I replied evenly, smoothing the lapels of my tailored charcoal gray pinstripe blazer. "Thank you for your efficiency." I picked up my smartphone from the marble island, stepped over my father's useless checkbook, and walked out the front door without looking back. 6 weeks later, the federal paper trail finalized their absolute systemic ruin. The Department of Justice did not offer a plea deal for utilizing a stolen Social Security number to launder $3 million through offshore Cayman accounts. Trent was formally indicted on multiple Class B felony counts. Without access to the traditional banking system or his decentralized wallets to post the massive federal bail, his private creditors violently foreclosed on his margin loans, seizing his leased matte black G-Wagon and his luxury apartment. He went from an arrogant, self-proclaimed visionary to a terrified, broke 29-year-old sitting in a federal holding cell, awaiting trial for international money laundering. Richard and Martha's domestic accounts remained completely frozen under federal asset forfeiture laws. Because they had knowingly accepted $250,000 in untaxed, laundered money to remodel their estate, the IRS launched a devastating, retroactive 5-year forensic audit into Richard's entire commercial real estate portfolio. The aggressive legal retainer required to keep them out of pre-trial federal detention completely drained their available cash reserves, forcing them to aggressively liquidate their sprawling suburban home at a massive loss just to afford groceries and legal fees. The IRS formally cleared my Social Security number of all fraudulent commercial tax liabilities, instantly restoring my immaculate credit profile and unlocking my operating capital. I filed a permanent ironclad restraining order against my entire family, and a federal judge granted it without hesitation. They thought they could use my identity as a shield, steal my financial infrastructure, and demand I go to federal prison to fund the golden child's delusions. But they anchored their entire digital empire to my forensic domain, completely forgetting that the real power always resides in the metadata. And my paper trail was bulletproof. If your own family stole your Social Security number to launder millions of dollars and demanded you take the fall for a $500,000 tax evasion charge, would you have handed the federal agents the encrypted flash drive, or would you have set up a payment plan to maintain family peace? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of absolute paper trail justice, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. See you in the next video.